Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the fifth round of the 1000 GM 6-day invitational tournament being held in New York City. Now, Levy is off to a really good start. He has 3.5 points out of 4, and in round number 5, he's playing with the black pieces against TeamGMHikaru. So let's jump right into the action. So the game starts with the move knight to f3, and here Levy plays the move d5, we get e3, and we have the move knight f6, and here c4 is played by you, pun intended. Levy decides to take the pawn on c4. Now when Levy takes this pawn, he has a very simple setup that he intends to play, which is the classic Queen's Gambit accepted. Now normally this occurs out of a different order. For example, it can occur like this with d4, c4 takes, e3, e6, takes, a6, and c5 on the next turn. But after takes is played here, and I really do like Levy choosing to play a system, it's very universal because when Levy goes e6 here, he's still going to play a6 and c5, and white really doesn't have anything better to do than to eventually play d4 and transpose back into the regular Queen's Gambit accepted. So we get castles, Levy plays the move a6, and here we have the move d4. Levy plays c5, and now we get this move knight c3. Levy goes b5, bishop b3, and we get the move bishop b7. And here Eugene Yu plays this move e4. Now it would seem to people who are watching this video, or at least on first glance, that Levy's opponent is super well prepared here, plays a very aggressive pawn sacrifice with this move e4. Now this line is very topical. It has been played a lot at the top level in recent times, but it's really worth pointing out that if you're gonna play something very aggressive like this pawn sac variation, you better know what you're doing. So after e4 is played here, Levy trades the pawns on d4, and now he goes knight bd7, and here we get this move a3 after a 15-minute plus thing. Now this is simply unacceptable. Now I'm going to say this probably once or twice, and you'll probably think I'm being overly harsh or critical, but if you're going to play sharp variations which involve pawn sacrifices, things of the nature, you have to look at all the variations. You simply cannot go into these situations if you do not know it stone cold. Now, the reason I mention this is I actually have looked at this variation quite recently, and the correct move for white to play here is this move rook to e1. Now, after rook to e1, black has two options. You can play either knight to c5, attacking the pawn and the bishop at the same time, or you can play this move knight to e5, and after bishop d5, queen d7 is played, the position becomes extremely sharp. But Eugene Yu spends 15 minutes before playing this move a3. In my opinion, if you do not have such variations memorized by heart and you're not at, say, a 2700 level, you cannot simply do this. It's just not acceptable to play like this because this is a very sharp line, and already here, as you can tell from the eval bar, black is in fact better. Now for Levy, this is obviously great news because I'm sure Levy was definitely surprised by this pawn sac variation. He probably wasn't sure what was going on, and he was definitely worried. I will point out, because I realized I didn't do this before blitzing out cd4, if black were to take this pawn on e4 after takes, and rook to e1, let's say you move this bishop back to b7, white can sack this bishop on e6, and after takes, say you go bishop e7, there's bishop g5 here, pinning the bishop on e7, and after knight to c6 and d5, white is actually very close to winning the game. Additionally, if you play this move bishop d5, for example, after takes, bishop takes c5, white has queen to c3, hitting the bishop and the pawn. If you go back to f8 to guard, after bishop g5, rooks are coming to d1 or c1. Black has zero development. All the pieces are on their home squares. So you can't go for this. I will point out one last little bit. The computer says after rook e1 and c4, rook e4, cb3, and queen b3 and bishop e7, white is only slightly better, but it's definitely not something that you want to go into. So Levy is well prepared clearly for this line with knight b7. We get a3, and now Levy plays this move knight c5 fairly quickly. Now, while this is not the absolute best move, I love the decision from Levy to play this move quickly because he immediately puts pressure on the pawn on e4 and the bishop on b3, and most importantly, he dodges any weird sacks on the e6 square. So the game continues with f3, and now Levy plays the move queen b6, trying to take advantage of the lack of white development on the queen side and bring the rook to the center immediately. We get the move bishop to e3, and now Levy takes the bishop. We get queen takes knight, and we have this move bishop c5, and here the move knight ce2 is played. Now keep in mind already here, knight ce2 is the only move to not lose the game. If you play the move rook a to d1 after e5, it's already uh-oh spaghetti-o time. If you move the knight, you lose the bishop on e3, and if you don't move the knight, you lose it on the d4 square. So you lose a knight or a bishop here, and with it you lose the game. So we get knight c to e2 here, which guards the knight, but most importantly, if black ever plays the e5, you can move the knight either to f5 or to the c2 square, and you will not lose the bishop on e3. All right, so after knight c e2, we get the move rook to d8 played, and here Eugene Yu plays the move rook f d1. Now, obviously, the players are at a significantly lower level, but it is worth pointing out that if you had found rook a to c1 here, Levy probably would have lost this game, in my opinion, because there's really only one way to thread the needle and not lose on the spot, and that involves this very long forced line. If you were to play a move like bishop e7 after knight to f5, the bishop hits the queen, the knight hits the pawn and the bishop, and you resign the game. If you try to castle here on g8, white will sack the rook, with rook takes bishop, and after takes, knight e6, queen guards the bishop on e3, bishop hits the queen, and the knight forks the two towers and the queen at the same time. And after queen e7, let's just say takes, and knight d4, white has an extra pawn in the center of the board, and white will win the game. So after rook a1, the only line that which does not lose for black here is to take the knight, white takes back, you sack the rook, and after queen c3, e5, takes, queen c7, you have this move knight to d7, again an only move here. If you trade the queens, you're going to lose the bishop, and if you preserve the bishop with bishop a8, there's rook c8 check, winning the rook in the corner. So you have to go knight d7, only move guarding the queen, and after rook f d1, the computer says that after h5, trying to activate the rook with rook h6, white is only very slightly better here in this position after rook takes d4 and rook h6. Now, would this have happened? I think there's almost zero chance that Levy would have found h5 and rook h6, and without those moves, he would have lost the game. But fortunately for Levy, his opponent here plays the move rook f to d1 instead, which also makes a lot of sense, trying to overprotect the horse on d4. Levy castles, and now we get this move king h1. Now, this move is simply a bad move, which is uncalled for. However, having said that, it was very clear to me that based on the opening, Levy's opponent was very nervous. He was trying very hard, it felt like, to be very solid and make the draw. And king h1 is a move that dodges any pins on the long diagonal, and white can always go bishop g1 or knight c2 later. So here Levy plays rook d7, we get the move queen c3, and now we have the move rook c8. Now it's worth pointing out that in this position, queen c3 would have been better, because here if black goes rook c8, you'll notice there's no longer rook on this file, which targets this knight. There's no rook here hitting the knight, whereas in the game, after we get this position with rook c8, now the rook is optimally placed to target the knight and the queen, but the other rook, most importantly, is on the d file. So the rook's on the c and d files, it's actually looking pretty decent for Levy. So here Eugene plays the move knight c2, and now Levy plays the move bishop d4. Now Levy could obviously trade the bishops on e3 and play an endgame. Most likely the game would end in a draw here, but there's no need to be premature and hasten the end of the game. So after knight c2, Levy plays this move bishop d4, and now we get this move queen b3. Now white could have played the move bishop takes d4, and after takes rook c2, knight d4, rook takes b2, and bishop a5. White is actually doing completely fine here, because if you don't play the sacrifice with knight takes pawn, say you go, I don't know, h6, white has bishop c3 here, rook has no squares available on b3, c2, or e2 in this position, and after rook f2, king g1, suddenly the rook is simply stuck on f2, and white will win the game. So black has to actually sack on e4 here, and after takes knight f3, let's just say takes in this position, and h6 to avoid the ice skater checkmate. White is a little bit better here after, say, let's just say knight d2, bishop d5, and bishop b4, for example. White has a knight for a bishop. White probably can't win this game, mind you, but white is the only one who potentially has chances down the road, since he has an extra horse. Now, obviously, this line is very long. It's not something that you would expect someone at this level to find, but I felt like it was worth pointing out. At any rate, Levy's opponent goes queen b3, and now Levy plays the move bishop c5 back, and here we reach really one of the critical moments of the game. So Eugene Yu, he's up 4 minutes on the clock. He has 23 minutes and 50 seconds. Levy is 19 minutes and 55 seconds. And here he spends 7 minutes and 40 seconds before trading the bishops on c5. Now, keep in mind, this player, Eugene Yu, he is trying to make an IM norm potentially in the tournament. So he kind of decides to keep the position alive. But honestly, using 7 minutes here is a very big mistake. And the reason it's a big mistake is that there is one key principle or one core truth, which I think all these players have to keep in mind. And that is that with one time control, if games get down to say 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes or less, or players have less time than that, Levy is simply a very, very good blitz player. I've said it many times that his style is very tactical. He plays a lot of blitz online, including Title Tuesday. And if the players end up in a scramble, I would say most of the time that's going to favor Levy. He already won one game, which was drawn against Polyanakova early in the tournament in the time scramble. So you really have to make a decision here where either you take the bishop right away or you play queen c3 right away, but you have to make this decision in 1 to 2 minutes. You cannot afford to spend 7 minutes before making that decision. So we get the trade of the bishops, and now knight e3 is played here, and Levy goes queen to e5, trying to set up a couple of things. First of all, we have a wooden shield with the queen. The queen is on a nice diagonal. It targets all the pawns potentially on e4, h2, and b2 in the long term. Additionally, down the road, if you have the opportunity, you might even want to sack a horse here and take the pawn, line up a double A battery and go for checkmate, or even another cute sack, which is takes, bishop takes pawn, sacking the bishop, and then knight g4, threatening checkmate on h2, but also threatening to fork the king and the rook via the f2 square. So queen e5 is actually a very nice move. Computer wants queen g5, but I like queen e5 from a practical standpoint. And now we get to move a4 after another long think of 6 minutes from Eugene Yu. Now again, nothing wrong with this move, but spending 6 minutes before playing it is simply too much time. So you get a4 here. Levy plays bishop c6, a move that he plays after about 6 minutes, and now we get this very strange move, which is a5 played after 2 minutes. Now this is simply, from a practical standpoint, a terrible decision. Main reason this is a terrible decision is because even if this move is relatively acceptable here, it doesn't create any threats. And after you go a5 here, what is white trying to do? It's really unclear. All you're doing is creating a long-term weakness on a5, and now Levy plays this move h6 in the position. Now, if I were playing this position and I had 10 minutes on the clock against a player of the same level or someone who's higher rated, I would instantly take this pawn on b5, and after takes knight c3, I would try to make the draw here. The reason that you should never be able to lose this position with white is because both the pawns on b2 and a6 are a little bit weak here. You can always trade off the knight for the bishop, and the king side is very, very stable. Neither side has an imbalance. All the pawns are on the same files here for white and black, and there really is just very little play here. So if I were down 6 to 10 minutes on the clock here at this point in the game, and I don't really feel like I can be better, I would simply trade the pawns, trade material, which makes my moves easier, but also limits or reduces the risk of me losing the game. Instead, we get the move a5, and now Levy plays the move h6 here, creating the classic Lufthansa for the king so that there are no longer any ice skaters with the back rank checkmate. After h6, we get this move queen b4, and now Levy plays the move bishop b7. And while you're probably looking at the eval bar and seeing it shift a little bit, because the computer I think likes queen g5 a bit more, bishop b7 is a very nice move here because you open up the file, but most importantly, you're asking white what is he going to do. Now, one thing that I've noticed a lot around the 23 to 2400 level rating range is that a lot of players are impatient. They struggle to play moves that improve the position if there's no concrete plan. Now, Levy already showed really good nuance by playing h6, which was a quiet move instead of trying to force anything. But here, his opponent effectively cracks under, I think, the time pressure and the weight of the situation. Now, what white should do here is play a move like h3, for example, creating the Luft for the king, so you have an escape square on h2, or a move like rook d4 potentially as well. Although for me, I would just play h3 and then think about the position. Instead, Yu is spending a lot of time here. Sorry about the pun, it's not intended, but Yu is spending a lot of time here, and he ends up playing this move rook takes d7 after a couple of minutes because he's starting to feel the pressure of the clock. And once again, you're probably thinking, well, why do I make such a big deal out of the time usage and these things? The reason I make a big deal is because when you think about the game of chess, ultimately, what can you control? You can control your own moves, obviously, in terms of the moves that you play, but you can definitely control your time usage. If your opponent plays great moves, they play like Magnus, you're going to lose the game no matter what you do, but that is completely out of your control. But when you get yourself very low on time, your moves generally are not going to be as good. A lot of players are not as good when they play classical chess, and then they have to start playing moves with limited time on the clock. And when you combine that with the fact that Levy is a very, very good blitzer, a lot of experience, all these things really work against you, and in the end, it ends up becoming a self-inflicted problem of the situation. So In this position, white should play a waiting move, but after rook takes d7 and knight takes d7, now things are starting to spin a little bit out of control for white because Levy is able to rotate the horse. You can put the horse on c6 to pressure the pawn on a5. You can also put the horse on c5 to go towards d3 or a4 with the pawn supporting the knight jumps. And you also have a third idea here, which is that if white plays just a quiet move like king g1, you can even play this move f5 here. And now suddenly white has huge problems in the center of the board as black is attacking the pawn shape. So rook takes d7, a fairly serious mistake. Obviously, the computer's still going to say white's fine after a quiet move like rook c1, but we get the more thematic move rook d1. Levy goes knight c5, and now we get the move knight g4, which is the start of the going in the process of losing the game. Now, what white should have played here was the move queen to d4, trading the queens off the board. And in this position, sorry, actually, knight takes d4. White is still fairly stable. Computer says black is better after knight a4, but I don't really see it as being all that serious of a problem. Instead, you plays knight g4, and now Levy is forced to go queen g5. And at this point, there's really, I think, only one move to save the game, which Eugene does not find. In this position, the only move that I think can save the game is this move h3. Now, the reason this move is so important is not only does it create the lift for the king, but it also guards the knight on g4. So say you play a move like, I don't know, rook a1, for example. Black can play knight takes e4 here, and if you take back with the pawn, you lose the knight on g4, and now black simply has an extra pawn on the king side. So now knight e4 is a big threat. Your knight is very weak. If you go h3, the pawn supports it, so after takes, the knight is not hanging. So it's a dual purpose move, which creates the lift for the king, but it also guards the knight. Now, obviously, it's a move that I think I probably would find, but with time running down, Eugene not being, I think, a super strong blitz player, at least not relative to Levy, he simply is struggling, and he tries to play this move knight c3 instead to avoid hanging the pawn on e4. But after knight to c3, white is now very close to the loss, and Levy wastes no time in striking back with this move h5. Now, I cannot state enough how good Levy's time usage has been in these games, because if you look at this position here up to this point, he plays these moves very quickly. He plays queen g5, and here he uses his time before playing the move h5, and he does indeed play it. We get knight up 2, and now this crushing move queen to e3. Now you're probably thinking, well, the bar says it's only slightly better, but the reason this is so bad for white is that there's a very obvious move here for white to play, which is the move king to g1 guarding the knight. But after king to g1, black can sack the horse with knight to d3. You can't capture the knight because then I take your king. You move the queen, you lose the horse. So the only other logical move is, well, take the horse. But if you take the horse, there's queen to e1, and the white king is simply ice skated. King has no squares to move to, and it's game over on the spot. So white can't play king g1. Now, if you go knight h3 here, now black infiltrates with the knight to d3. Let's say you go queen b3, for example. And after b4, everything is starting to fall apart here for white. If you move the knight, there's knight f2, creating the classic fossil, where when you take the horse, you lose your queen. And if you play a move like rook d3, which is the only move after takes, queen b4 and bishop c6, black simply has a rook for a knight and a pawn, and should be much better, if not winning in the long run. So what's happening here? There are only two other moves, one of which is not played in the game, which is rook to f1 here, trying to guard the knight. But now after rook to d8, black is going for the kebab with rook d2. You have an active queen, you have an active rook. They're ice skater threats because the king has no lift on h2. And at this point, I think with limited time, I suspect actually if I had this position against Levy with white here after rook d8, I probably would lose here too. So Eugene plays the move queen to d4. We get the trade of the queens, and now Levy plays knight b3, forking the pawn and the rook at the same time. Eugene plays rook d7, and now we get the move knight takes a5, and here the move knight d3 is played to stop b4. At this point, if white were to play h4, for example, it's still very much a game, as you can move the king up. These knights can get very active here, and the show goes on. Mind you, black is much better here, but it's not game over. Instead, in this position, Eugene plays move knight to d3, trying to stop b4, but also intending to maybe jump to the e5 square with the horse. And here Levy again makes a great decision to use 2.5 minutes and play king f8. Now this game, or several of these games, ultimately have come down to the time usage, and this is a perfect example of when you have the time and you use it at the right moments, you're going to find better moves than your opponent will, because you have those 3 extra minutes. And king f8 is the best move, and after this move, it is very clear that Levy is on his way to winning a 4th game out of 5 games in the tournament. The reason for this is that white has a big issue here with the rook. So say you play a move like h4, for example. After king e8, let's say rook d4, knight c6, rook d6, and king e7, your rook is getting trapped, and after e5, knight takes pawn. I guess you can play on with rook b6, but after takes and king f8, black simply has 2 extra pawns here in this position, and he should be winning the game. So after king to f8 is played, Eugene plays knight e5, last ditch effort, because otherwise your rook is going to get trapped. And now Levy again finds a good move, which is king to d8. Now keep in mind, b4 is maybe very slightly better here, because I think after rook takes f7, you can go king to g8, and after knight e2, rook c2, attacking the knight. Knight's got to go back home. If you go away, you get ice skated once again. Knight goes home, rook takes b2, followed by b3, rook c2, b2, and b1. Black should be winning. It's not conclusive, but it's very close to winning. At any rate, after knight to e5, Levy instead plays the move king to e8, trying to threaten both f6 and rook c5 to win either the knight on e5 or the rook on d7. Here, Eugene plays the move rook f7, and now Levy plays the move b4. Now, at this point in the game, you'll look at the time, you'll see like Levy has 143. I think he got down to like 30 seconds when he played this move, or he got around 30 seconds or a little bit less when he played this move. But now, to everyone's shock, Eugene Yu here simply froze and flat. He ran out of time, and Levy got the win in this position. Obviously, very anticlimactic end to the game, certainly, but Levy probably would have won this game even if it had continued, because in their post-game analysis, the move that his opponent was considering was knight to e2. Now, the reason I thought king g8 was a little bit more concrete, or b4 first was concrete, is because after rook takes pawn, stacking the horse here, and h4, black is much better in this position, but it is not conclusive whatsoever, because you have a weak pawn on h5. White is going to try and push the h and g pawns up the board, and it definitely goes on. But as I said, in the post-game analysis, his opponent mentioned the move knight e2, and after rook c2, knight g1, rook takes b2, rook takes g7, and b3. Black is very conclusively winning, because after, say, rook d7, rook c2, you're going b2, and rook c1 here, sample line, rook d1, let's say b2, rook b1, and now you can go bishop c. Actually, sorry, wrong order. Here you should probably play knight c6, and if white goes knight d3, you can go a5, a4, push these pawns up the board. And if white trades, it's the same issue. Takes, a5, a4, b2, and you win the game. But because of the imprecise order with king e8 played, if Eugene had found this move, rook takes pawn, and takes, and h4, computer actually, now I'm looking, only gives us this 0.8 for black. So this might actually be a draw with perfect play. But fortunately for Levy, his opponent doesn't see this line and runs out of time. So Levy gets a very big win. He wins his second game of the day. He moves to 4.5 points out of 5. He's now gaining something like 14 to 15 rating points, which is very, very good in terms of trying to get ever closer to 2,500. He's very far away still, but nonetheless, it is very good. Now, Levy had a much better day today. He played 2 very solid games, but for me, the biggest standout for Levy is not actually the moves themselves, but the time usage. One of the things that stands out is when you're playing well, you're playing with confidence, you tend to use your time very well, and Levy has not been going to a lot of very deep thinks, and when he has these critical moments, he's sensing the moments to think, and he's using that time very, very well. So a very impressive result from Levy once again. He gets another win. Obviously, if the players are stronger, you can say, well, he wouldn't win this against 2,400. And that might be true, but in this situation, it's good enough to get the job done. And it's good to see Levy playing great chess. So on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from the 5th round of the 1000 GM Summer Invitational being held in New York. If you are not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below. And we will be back soon with some more great recaps of Levy's final 4 games in this 1000 GM tournament being held in New York City. All right, you guys, hope you enjoyed the recap. I'll see you tomorrow, and have a great rest of your day. Have a good one. Bye.